All right, thank you very much. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us at Venture Cafe for another virtual artist talk. My name is Angela McQuillan, and I'm the curator at the Esther Klein Gallery at the Science Center in Philadelphia, which is also home to Venture Cafe. So tonight, I'm really excited to present the work of photographer Zave Smith, who is a regular at Venture Cafe. Zave describes himself as a still and motion storyteller, and his photography captures the tangible pleasures and tactile experiences of life. So before we get started, I want to let you know that we'd love for this session to be interactive. So please feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question at any time, or you can go ahead and type it into the chat box and I'll moderate. So we'd love for this to be more like a conversation. So everyone, please give a warm welcome to Zave Smith.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for coming. It's 6 o'clock on a Thursday night. Some of you are probably, like me, a little tired, and I find it kind of amazing that you're willing to give me 45 minutes, an hour of your time on a Thursday night when you could be just like eating popcorn and watching reruns of the debate or something, you know. So anyway, give you a little background about myself. I'm basically a commercial photographer in Philly, have been around for this year being my 31st year as a commercial photographer. The first 10, I basically spent shooting products, food, and still life in a studio setting. Around 2000, I pivoted into shooting people, portraits, and lifestyle. Lifestyle, for those of you who don't know, basically, lifestyle are pictures of people looking like they're having a good time doing something. It's more about the activity than about the person. Where portraiture is about the person, not so much the activity. So when you think about portraiture, you're thinking about a person and their environment. And you're thinking lifestyle, you're thinking more about the activity that someone is doing, wherever they might be doing it. When COVID hit back in March, the commercial photo business became very quiet, like just silent. And like a lot of people, my wife and I just kind of hunkered down for a while. Very seldom ventured from the house, except grocery shopping once every 2 weeks or so, and come home and wash the groceries and all that. By mid-May, my curiosity was getting to me, and I felt like I needed to get out there and see what was really going on. And while I've been photographing people and lifestyle for 30 years, I haven't really done any street photography or photographing strangers in all that time, pretty much. Most of my time, most of my work, as you can see here, is commercial stuff. They're models, or they're people who work at the places I'm photographing. They're there either for compensation or because they're part of the story of the company. They're usually well groomed. They're usually directed. And so back in May, I thought, well, let's go see what's going on around town. And I came up with the idea of doing a shoot or a series that I call Back to Work. Okay, let me go here. Yeah, there we go. So, this back May, things were starting to open. Retail shops were starting to open again. Restaurants were starting to do a little bit of carry-out work. Most of the people you saw on the street back then were either medical personnel, security personnel, or construction personnel, because they were basically allowed to work through the pandemic. And my curiosity was, A, who's out there? B, what are they doing? And C, how do they feel about it? So my first venture, I live in Wallingford, Pennsylvania. So downtown Media is about a 1.5 mile jaunt from my front door. So that was my first place I went out. Just go to Media for a couple hours, see how it felt, see what's going on there, and see what I can see. So that's what I did. One of the first people I met was actually this young woman who works at a pediatric facility. It's a satellite for Nemours. And she was out there. They had a tent set up to do pre-testing before they let the families and the kids into the medical office. This was a time where I found the signage and the things about the virus and about the times we're living in almost as interesting as the people themselves. I'm actually going to have to sneeze. I apologize, folks. This allergy season for me. So that was one of the first signs I saw was at a Burger King. One moment. I can't believe it. Oh, well, guess I'm only human. And I haven't really photographed signs in years and years and years since art school, but I did find their crazy relationship and arrangement to be pretty fascinating. This guy wasn't necessarily a worker, but I just liked his look. He was at a laundromat in media folding some clothes. One of the other first people I came across was a postal worker. There's a large post office in media, and there was about half dozen postal workers loading their trucks that morning. So I got a chance to chat with them, see how they feel. I asked this guy if he felt a little nervous, and he said, no, I just trust in God. That was his answer. There's a little ice cream shop in media called, God, I can't remember the name of it. Anyway, and this is the owner of the shop. We talked for a few minutes. He talked about how his sales were like at 10% of normal. Anyone who's running business knows that if you're bringing in 10% of revenue or even 30% of revenue, you're just slowly going out of business. But he had a good attitude that morning. I think he was just happy to talk to someone who was actually on the streets and alive. This is from a pizza shop, Little Anthony's in media. And he had related to me how business was very poor because there was, media's got a court, it's the county seat and courthouse, and they were closed. So there was no lunch crowd anymore. And he was just basically surviving on carry out dinner time stuff, which wasn't a huge amount for him. After that, I got a little braver and I went down to Center City and I did a couple walks. The first one I did was what I call Market East. I basically started on, what's the name of the main, Market Street, Market and First, and walked from there to City Hall. As I said, most of the people I met were either in the restaurant business, the security business, or the construction business. And I didn't have a lot of time with these folks. They were in the middle of the workday. They had a foreman hanging over their head. I had about a minute to 2 minutes with each person who I photographed. These guys were just about to unload some marble countertops.
I have a question for you, Zave. When you're just walking down the street like this and you see like a group of people or a person that you are interested in photographing, how do you approach them and like make them feel comfortable?
You know, on this one, I made a conscientious decision basically to ask permission of everyone I photographed. Typically, street photographers will just photograph a scene and try to be like a fly on the wall and not interact. I decided to actually only photograph people who gave me their permission. There's a couple street scenes that happened just because they were so interesting. But 90% of the work you'll see today, I talked to the people. I also did some short videos, which I incorporated into another little body of work. Ask them how they felt, you know, what it was like to be out there, things like that. But I'm blessed with the ability of making people feel pretty comfortable pretty quickly just by chatting a minute or two. I guess I look extremely non-threatening. This guy had another pizza shop, and he also had a pedal tour company, you know, where you get a bunch of people on these bicycle things and they pedal around and get really drunk and scream. And obviously his business was also suffering greatly back in May when I started this. He had related that, you know, about a third of the people, third of the shops on Market, he's on Market and Second, were going out of business. She works at one of my favorite coffee shops. I think it's called Menage or something like that. It's over on 3rd, just south of Market Street. They make a great cappuccino there. I asked her what it was like. She said, I'm just grateful to be out here and help the community out. And she felt like a lot of support from the people she was able to bring a little joy in their life, a little good coffee. There's nothing wrong with good coffee. She also had amazing eyes. You know, one of the things I've discovered photographing people in mass is it's almost like being in a Muslim country. You really get into their eyes because that's basically all you can see. So this was over in Washington Square Park, obviously a Penn doctor taking a couple-minute break, doing some paperwork. Then I went over to Market West. I started basically at the Amtrak station and walked from there to City Hall. This is inside the Reading Terminal. This was about noon at the Reading Terminal. So you can imagine pre-COVID what that spot would look like at 12 o'clock. I had to throw in one of myself. This is actually on the south side of City Hall. This is Amtrak, Penn Station at 8:36 a.m. Again, if you can imagine what Amtrak station looks like in normal times or pre-COVID times, at 8:36 a.m., I would not be able to do a shot like this because I'd be jostled by the crowds. Here, this was they were rebuilding the Walnut Street Bridge, I think it was, and talked to him for a couple minutes. He was just thankful to be out there and earning a paycheck again, and did not feel at all unsafe. He said the guys just kept their mask on and kept working. Well, this was, I wish I could see the date on this thing. I can't, but this was a headline in the New York Times I found on the street when we passed 100,000 deaths. This is the Apple store on Walnut and was it 15th or so? Obviously an Apple store in the middle of the week, middle of the day would be jam-packed, and at this point it was still closed. I've really gotten in this year to photographing layers of things and reflections. It happens randomly, but when it happens, it's really, really wonderful. These were three guys who basically doormen over one of the fancier high rises. This was Suburban Station, probably about 4 in the afternoon. You can imagine what that looks like on a normal day. I asked this guy, I said, what's it like to be, you know, as a security officer down there this time? He said, well, virus or not, you still got a police. My next venture was over at the Italian market. The Italian market is interesting. I hadn't been there or photographed there in a long time, probably 10 years. But my memory of shooting in the Italian market was very uncomfortable. There was an air of suspicion when you walked in there with a camera. They usually shooed you away. They didn't want you there. This time, most of the people were, I think, just happy to have some attention. And I felt very comfortable and welcome. There was 1 or 2 people who didn't want to have their photograph taken, but most of the folks were extremely cooperative, which kind of surprised me. This is one of the counter people at the fish market on 9th and Washington, whose name I don't remember. I think that's going to be a recurring thing tonight, will be things I don't remember. Capuccio's Meats. I actually, last time I shot there was an ad, was a video ad campaign for promoting the Pope's visit. What was that, 8 years ago approximately? So we shot part of the spot in this guy's butcher shop. Hadn't changed much. This is another pizza place. I guess pizzerias were able to do, you know, pretty well because they're basically a carry-out kind of business from the get-go. Again, his attitude was he was just grateful that he could be there for the community, and he felt like he was getting a lot of support from his patrons. The Italian market's gotten kind of interesting. I don't know if any of you have spent any time there recently. You know, right now it's basically three or four ethnic groups who run that place. You've got the old school Italians, you've got Hispanics, you know, with the Mexicans and other Central American, and you got a strong Asian presence and a little bit of African American presence. So it's become a real melting pot of Philly life. This guy was very proud of his restaurant. If you're going to be in an Italian market, you're going to do a story about Philly, you got to do a shot at Gino's, right? After that, I went north up to the Temple University area, North Market Street, to see what was going on there. Temple campus, this is probably shot around the 1st of June, I'm guessing. Again, was almost silent. The only people I saw were construction and security, and just a handful of professors who are floating around, or mainly administrators. I just love this guy's truck with the ladder on it, and his tool belt, and the purple face mask dangling around his neck. Very sweet guy. This guy was in the business district next to Temple University, and he was one of the nicest people I've ever photographed. He had this kind of infectious warmth to him. And here's a guy with, you know, in terms of like society status, you know, being a guy who cleans the street is not exactly high up there, but he was just very warm, very nice, and very glad to be out there and being of service to the local community. Great guy. He was a construction worker. He had a plumbing shop, and he was doing some repair work. These guys have had their produce truck up on North Broad Street for 30 years. This struck me. I think the contrast between the boarded up windows, the McDonald's sign, and the white BMW was just something I couldn't resist. So from there, I actually wanted to go inside a business, and you know, you just can't go knocking on doors and get inside of factories and offices and such. Luckily, First Look Display Group is a client of my marketing company, so I called them up and said, "Hey, come up and do a free photo shoot for you." So that's how I got in there. They're a small metal shop that makes signage, basically for businesses. Though they were finding they had a huge demand for and innovated doing plastic dividers and stuff for retail shops and bars and restaurants. They were going to close down, but also a lot of their clients called us, "Hey, we need dividers. Can you make something?" So they switched, they pivoted, and they started making these dividers. I would think it'd be really hard to work in a warm shop all day long with a mask on, but they did. Here's one of the owners in the office. Drill press operator. A welder. Welders used to being hot and masked all the time anyhow. I was surprised this place had 2 women working in it out of a workforce of about 10, which is for, you know, manual labor or semi-skilled manual labor is kind of unusual. So from there, I went over to Upper Darby, a place I had photographed in a year earlier. I was working on the annual report for the Foundation of Delaware County, and we spent an afternoon photographing in this same area. So I went back. I've always found the Upper Darby Business District to be a fascinating place because it has people from all over the world there. It is such an integrated culture. When you're photographing recent arrivals and immigrants and people with a language barrier, there often is suspicion. They're just, I think, sometimes worried that you might be with the FBI, the police, or INS. It's a little harder to connect, but I managed to connect pretty well with most of them. What I found very fascinating in these stores was just how jam-packed the merchandise is. And if you think of a high-end store like an Apple store or some high-end fashion stuff where your displays are very sparse, you go into a place like Upper Darby, an immigrant community, and it's like a million things per square inch. It's just jammed with objects. Woman who sold mainly nurses' outfits. That was her claim to fame. One of the barbershops, again, a business that's difficult to operate during this time of COVID because of the safety regulations, but he was hanging in there. This is a fashion shop. It was really funny because when I asked them how they felt working there, it's, oh, this is fantastic. We love being here. You know, don't feel fearful at all. But when I look into her eyes in this photograph, I get a sense of being a little nervous. That was one of her coworkers, City Blue. This is another fashion shop. This was a men's place. Real different vibe, real different vibe. They had beautiful hats. And I would have bought myself one or two. So I kept thinking, it's COVID. I don't go anywhere. Where am I going to wear it? You know, I should go back. Once COVID's over, I'm going to go back and buy a few hats. They had a nice collection. This is one of the few places I photographed indoors where the owner was not wearing a mask. I just thought his skin texture was just amazing. He just had this fantastic expression and this amazing skin, and I just loved it. He sold essential oils, basically. This is one of the few shots I've done that I did not talk to the person I photographed. I just saw this from afar and thought, that's great. So then I went up to the 52nd Street corridor. This was probably about 4 weeks after this area got hit really hard in the Black Lives Matter protests. And there was a lot of looting up here. And the stores, when I got there about 4 or 5 weeks after that, were just beginning to reopen. That community up there is a lot, really high degree of Muslim influence. There's a lot of, this shop basically sold garb, women's Muslim outfits and garb and such. Really beautiful stuff. This guy was up the street. He's a painter working on a construction project. And again, I just loved his smile. That was his crew.
So Zave, when you're taking a photo or when you see something that you want to take a photo of, do you notice the details like skin texture in the moment, or is that something that you notice after you've taken the photo and look at it later?
Sometimes both or either. It kind of really depends on the situation. When during this series, between being masked up, being a little, I was outside of my normal zone of working. I'm working with people who don't know me, with strangers. They're masked, I'm masked. So we're both physically uncomfortable. One of the things I've lamented about this time period is we are uncomfortable around strangers. They make us nervous in a way that they didn't pre-COVID. I'm a very social guy. I love going up to people. I love finding their story, who they are, what makes them tick. But during this time period, it just feels, everything feels just a little bit more distant. It's harder to make that connection, especially when you can't see their faces and they can't see my face. They don't know who I am. So these photographs happen fairly quickly. You know, I probably talked to this guy for a minute. So no, a lot of times I walk up, I'm seeing, in this series, I'm basically seeing either a personality that looks interesting or an environment that looks interesting, or hopefully a combination of the person and the environment looks fascinating. But no, I don't always see all those details. Just can't. But that's the beauty of photography. You can take it home and let it teach you something later on. I always, when I talk to other photographers about their work, or even talk about my own work, and you're sitting here, okay, here, I got this project I'm working on. Is it any good? Where's it going to go? What should I do with it? And I always say, you need to enter into a dialogue with your photos. Put your photos up somewhere, look at them, live with them. What do they tell you? Because they will tell you where to go next. They'll tell you if they're interesting, they'll tell you why they're interesting, and they'll tell you where to go. So you just have to be an open heart, an open mind, and enter into a dialogue with your work. I walked in on this guy. He was filming himself with a little video camera. Wow, and I thought that was fantastic. It was a Islamic bookstore again on the 52nd Street corridor. Michael, I actually, every person I met, I gave him my business card, and I said, hey, send me an email, because I had nothing to write with really. Send me an email, I'll send you a copy of the photo. And about 20% did. And I gladly send them a copy of the photo. Why not? Again, this is another one of these reflective layer things that I just find so fascinating. These kind of photos tend to work best when you can see them large. I don't know what kind of screen you're all looking at. I meant to say something in the beginning of the talk about make the pictures as large as you can on your screen. I find that in this age where we look at so much work on a phone or an iPad or a little 15-inch laptop with 3 other windows open, it's really hard to appreciate what's going on in the photo. Excuse me. Details matter, size matters. Once in a while, I have a very close friend of mine, a gentleman named Steve Prezan, who's a photographer up in New York City. And a couple months ago, it's probably almost a year ago now, I was sharing his work with some of my business partners, and we put up on we put his website up on a 72-inch TV. We used, the Apple AirPlay. And it was just like amazing, the detail and how you could just get in it and walk around the photograph visually. It was great. Some photographs work really well small, and I think that's actually working against us as artists, is the medium. It works only with stuff that's really graphic and really simple and really quick. Stuff that's more nuanced and detailed just does not translate very well to the age of Facebook and Instagram. He basically had a tax preparation business. What did he tell me? He did about 700 tax returns a year. After doing the 52nd Street corridor, I said to myself, what is the most opposite place I could visit? And I went, duh, King of Prussia Mall. So I went out to King of Prussia Mall, and I expected I would last there about 5 minutes before security would kick me out. Because anytime I've ever tried to photograph in a mall, usually the mall security is all over you instantaneously. In fact, I've done several commercial shoots in malls, and the paperwork to get permission to go inside of them is huge. It's always a hassle. It can take several weeks. So I went out there thinking, oh, this is going to be a real quick shoot. I'll be here about 5 minutes, right? No one bothered me. I was there for about 3 hours, 2-3 hours. No one bothered me. It was quite amazing. Of course, he didn't see me. This is, again, one of the very few examples or instances where I photograph people without permission. Same with her, to be honest. The rest of these, I basically talk to these guys. He is an interesting guy because he used to be a school teacher. And then after about 10 years of teaching middle school, he got a little burned out on that and then opened this comic book store. Jewelry repair guy in the mall. I just thought the rhythm of all these people doing all their different things. I was actually, when I got there, I was just kind of surprised how busy it was. I was expecting it to be much more empty, but it was fairly busy. Of course, I hardly ever go to malls, so I really didn't know. I had no baseline to compare it to. Like, I was not in the King of Prussia Mall last year or the year before in the middle of the week to know how busy it normally is. I just don't know. I always wonder about these situations. Does 14 signs actually do better in sales than 12 signs or 10? I don't know. But they love putting these signs up, and they make great, you know, rhythm staccato notes in a photograph, so I might as well use them. She had just, you know, one of the things that struck me is almost everyone I photographed in this whole series was so upbeat. And, you know, when I think of like malls, I never think of them as upbeat places. We got some stuff I shot down in Wildwood on the boardwalk coming up. I never think of these places of the people who work there as being happy and upbeat, but they were. I was very, very surprised. He owned this ice cream shop. At least I think he owns the ice cream shop. He claimed he owned the ice cream shop. This guy, again, had just an amazing, infectious smile. He repaired phone screens. He had a little kiosk there in the middle of the mall. So then I went to Wildwood. I have to confess, my wife and I very seldom go down the shore. We're not beach people. I wasn't raised in this part of the world, so I don't have that tradition of spending 2 weeks down the shore with my extended family. I've only been to Wildwood a couple times in my life, but again, when I was thinking about street photography and businesses, down the shore this time of year made a lot of sense to me because that's where Philadelphia goes. So I went down to Wildwood. And Wildwood, I found it to be a really amazing place because how friendly and happy the people were, and what a diverse community is. It was just, I met people from Poland and from Russia and from all over the Philly region. It just seemed like all these people with various backgrounds and income groups basically coming, putting on some really crappy clothes and getting sunburned. It was fantastic. These two guys were from Russia, if I remember correctly, and they just cute as hell. What can I say? Got to have some hotties if you're going to have a ball thing, you know. Of course, be honest, the cop's mask was not on until I pulled out a camera. I asked this guy, he said this is the first summer he worked at Wildwood. He was from the South. He said, I'm definitely coming back next year. He just enjoyed himself so much. And I'm assuming he makes some money doing it. Same with this guy. They were partners in this balloon emporium or dart emporium. Again, what I enjoyed about shooting there, and just like in the stores, was the combination of the people and their personalities and these crazy environments that were so busy and overstuffed. And I just love it. I love the fact that the way the balloons work behind this guy and act as a texture, and the Mickey Mouse or Minnie Mouse, on the right, contrasting his face. These kind of just crazy environments with the personalities I just found so wonderful to look at. And again, I mean, you go into your typical store and I don't know how many pieces of merchandise they have per square foot, but nothing like Wildwood. He was probably one of the only people I met who was looked a little angry. I don't know why. She was from Poland, if I remember correctly. Great curly hair in this crazy shop. I actually spent some time talking to him. He's trying to start his own marketing firm. So it was quite interesting. In fact, he did send me an email, asked for some pictures, and I sent it to him. He was one of the best carnival barkers I had seen during this whole time. He really knew how to work a crowd and rev them up. This I found pretty fascinating. Like it's a paint gun place. And what they claim is that instead of shooting targets, you could just shoot a real person. Why that would be more enticing than shooting targets, I don't know. But there he was. And he was a very nice guy with a really hard job. I'm sure wearing that heavy rubber outfit with the mask on in a hot summer day is not anyone's definition of a good time.
And being pelted with paintballs.
And being pelted with paintballs. You know, this guy, obviously, he knows how to have his picture taken, because I'm sure he has it happen 30 times a day, maybe 300 times a day. Again, just very warm, very welcoming, very cooperative. I was just very, very impressed by how people were to me, how nice and accommodating they were. This guy was one of these people who just really loves what he does. We talked for a few minutes, and he said he just feels very blessed that he gets to do something that he really loves to do. And he's a tattoo artist. That's an overall shot of Maurice Pier. And with that, I have to say, thank you. Thank you for watching, for listening.
Well, thank you very much, Zave. I love your photos. They're beautiful, and they're also so personal, and they really like look into these people's lives.
Oh, thank you.
That was a wonderful presentation. Does anyone have any questions for Zave?
I have a comment. I think it was really, to add what Angela mentioned, I think as an amateur photographer, I think for your ability to go and share this story, when you take this photo, as you know very well, it tells a story. And for you to be able to tell the story about how it felt, how you felt, how it was when you took individual person's photos, it really brought a lot of extra, zest to the presentation. But the reason why I was asking it for the people whether or not they got a copy of it was I was just, sending a text to a friend to get their butt into the session. It's probably one of the better photos that they would have of themselves, simply because it's coming from a photographer with a very specific set eye on what he is looking for you, and also the pixels. So the quality and clarity will probably be the better half of what they'll ever have for the most part in general.
I have a little game.
Yeah, exactly.
So
no, I always, I'm at a stage in my career where, when you're a young photographer, a lot of young photographers, they think of their work as being so precious. They don't want to give it away. They got to sell it and monetize it, or it's got to be in a museum. I'm not that way. Anybody wants one of my photographs, thank you and enjoy it.
That's nice of you. So when you're walking around on these street tours, what kind of equipment are you using to take these photos?
I basically have just one camera body, a Canon 5D Mark IV, and I'm carrying usually two lenses. I have a straight 35, which probably shot 80% of the stuff with, 90% of the stuff with, and I have a 24-70 zoom. Weight's a consideration. I also had a microphone on the camera for when I shot some video work. Weight's a consideration. One of the things about doing street photography nowadays is most of the places that people like me are used to stopping in and using the bathroom are closed. So you got to time out your day. You got to kind of think ahead of time. Okay, there's going to be a Home Depot in that neighborhood or something that's going to be open. And you got to watch out for your creature comforts. I'm not a kid anymore. So I kept my gear very light. It's kind of funny. I was doing a big shoot on Saturday for a commercial client, and I packed my van. I had 6 power packs, and I had a dozen heads, and I had, grip equipment and scrims and gobos and, a truckload, right? We did a show. But this kind of stuff, it was just really a camera and 2 lenses. That's all I carried.
That's amazing. So how much time actually goes in? I know you go and, you take the photos while you're walking. How many photos do you actually take of each subject? And then how much time goes into like editing after the fact?
I didn't take a lot. Again, these people in the middle of work day, they can only give me a couple minutes, if that. So I mean, I never really counted, but I would say I probably shot between 10 and 30 exposures in each person. A couple of them probably fewer. You know, you kind of like at this stage in my career, when I approach this, I kind of have the photograph kind of pre-visualized in my mind before I even walk up to them and ask. And I'm really walking up, talking to them for a minute or two, getting them comfortable, getting their permission, pick up the camera, shoot a couple quick variations, try to get, you know, an expression, or, you know, just to make sure I don't get like, you know, something growing out of the back of their head or something like that. It's very quick. It's mainly pre-visualized. In post, you know, basically you go through and you pick out the ones that are good. All of these, one of the things I do a lot when I'm doing a project like this is I work on the color grading. You know, what are the tones that I want, how the overall look of the photograph. So with this series, I probably spent, you know, a couple hours playing with different color recipes, and then most of the stuff got processed according to the recipe that I liked the best. It seemed to fit this series of work. So again, with post work, I did very little retouching in any of these shots because it's street photography. You know, if it had been a commercial shoot, I would have had to take out every zit and make sure every logo's gone, and you know, who knows what, make people look a little thinner, and you know, give them a little facelift, whatever. Here, I didn't do any of that stuff. I just applied the color formula I wanted to apply, you know, adjusted the, a lot of times when you're doing street photography like this, you have to open up shadows. Shadows tend to block up a lot. So I would open up the shadows, and I didn't spend that much time in post. I couldn't tell you how much, but it wasn't a huge burden.
Yeah. When did you get your first camera, and do you remember what you photographed?
I had an Instamatic. The one I remember, it probably wasn't the first camera I ever had, but the one I remember was a little Kodak Instamatic that they sold in the 60s. And I took it, I had a week-long camp thing when I think I was in 5th grade. And I took it on that, and I came home, and I had all these pictures of like the arrows hitting the bullseye and things like that. It had nothing to do with anything. And I remember my parents looking at that and going, what's this about? It was just me reacting visually to what I saw. I mean, I do remember always being very aware of composition. I can remember walking to school in elementary school and noticing the relationship of, let's say, trees to telephone poles, to birds, to sky, to houses, and how it always changed when you walked, and how the composition of that stuff always changed as you move through space. So I've been aware of composition since forever.
Yeah. And I guess along that note, what in your opinion makes a good photo?
Well, I think all artwork tends to have 3 basic elements, good artwork. Number 1, it will usually have, not always, usually have some sort of narrative element. It will tell or imply a story. Even like really abstract art, usually if you look at it, it will give you an idea of some sort of story. Number 2, it has to do something to your eyes. When you look at a piece of good art, it will explode on your retina. You'll see something in a way you've never seen before. The colors or the texture or the drawing or something about that visual experience, your eyes will enjoy. It's a visual experience that's very, very, you know, exciting or pleasant or inspiring. And the way I call it, it will explode in your retina.
Yeah.
The third part, it will touch your soul. It will make you feel more human. It will somehow touch your humanity, give you a sense of awe, give you some sort of spiritual thing going on. So it's really a narrative element, a visual element, and a spiritual element. And almost all great works of art, if you look at them, will have some combination of those 3 things. It will be in different quantities. It won't all be 30, 30, 30. But usually great artwork of any sort contains those 3 elements. Not 100%, nothing is 100%, but that's usually what you'll find.
Yeah. So in the chat, people are talking about one of those old school cameras and talking about film. Do you ever use film in your photography, and or is that like a process that you miss?
When I started out, especially my college in the first 10 years post-college, I was known as a kind of a really good printmaker, and I experimented with all sorts of traditional printmaking techniques like photogravure and platinum and palladium printing, and I was really good in the wet darkroom. And around 2001, from a client request, I bought a digital camera and did a shoot with it with a lot of apprehension, and by 2002, I sold off all my wet darkroom and film gear.
Oh, wow.
I will say that I much prefer working in the digital realm for all sorts of reasons. You actually, tonalities you can control better. You don't sit in a stinky dark room, you know. It's repetitive, it's much quicker, it's archival. But all those things being said, it doesn't have magic. The analog process, when you put a piece of paper in a developer tray, you sit there in the dark and you rock it back and forth for 1.5 to 3 minutes, depending on what you were doing, and the image would slowly appear. I don't care how many times you did it. It was a sense of wonder and magic. There is no magic in the digital photography. It's really great. I mean, the tonalities you can get, how quickly you can work is fantastic, but it's not magical.
I would say though, on the flip side, I've taken a lot of black and white photography in the darkroom, and I would say that it's kind of a letdown if you take like a whole roll of film and none of the photos come out the way you want, and then you have to go out and like reshoot everything and start over. So there's also that aspect.
Yes, but how many times have you tried writing a paper or story and you got the same thing? You know, you tear it up, throw it in the trash, and start again.
Exactly. And I will say that also from doing those analog processes, you kind of get to understand the terminology, like in Photoshop functions like dodging and burning and all that stuff.
Well, all that stuff was basically, the metaphors of that were based on the analog world, because that's how you could translate it. I mean, when they first wrote Photoshop around, was it 2000 or late 80s? You know, those people were, they knew the terminology and the lingo of analog photography. So that's what they based it on. Definitely.
So you mentioned that you have a marketing company. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, actually, 4 years ago, a friend of mine and I started a brand design company called Xhilarate. And we basically do brand identity and brand strategy for clients really throughout the country. We have clients in California, in Boulder, Colorado, in Florida, in the Philly region, and even in London. So for a little 4-year-old company run by 3 kind of cranky guys, we're doing pretty well, especially in times of COVID. But you know, I'm lucky. I have 2 partners. Michael McDonald, who is probably one of the best graphic designers in the country. He has the ability of doing design work that is both beautiful and simple and stimulating and restful at the same time. He's just an amazing designer. Wow. And I have a guy named Russ Napolitano who drives new business. So, and then we have a string of freelancers, you know, talented copywriters, other designers, and brand strategists that we use on various projects.
Wow. So what did you actually go to school for?
Photography. I have a bachelor's in fine art photography.
Gotcha.
From the Milwaukee Institute of Art and Design in Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
So what are some pitfalls that you've experienced from running your own business?
Well, the photo business is probably one of the most difficult businesses you can run. And it's only gotten harder and harder as the need for good quality still photography has shrunk in the last 10, 20 years. When I started out my career, we were shooting things for billboards and double page magazine spreads. And you're going to do something like that, it's got to be a really good photo. People can see it. When companies now are putting their ad buys, you know, on Facebook or Instagram, it's that big. It basically has to be somewhat in focus. You know, it's got to be very simple and somewhat in focus. The need for quality photos is way down, number one. Number two, as the web has pivoted towards a video world, you know, why have a picture of a doctor and some copy underneath telling you why this drug that he's endorsing is a miracle, when you can have a video of the doctor explaining it? So the need for still photography has really shrunk tremendously in the last 10, 15 years. So, you know, I always say it's much easier to run a growing business than a shrinking business. It's much easier to throw money at a problem than try to cut your expenses quick enough. It's almost impossible. So the fact I'm still in business 31 years later in the still photography business at all is kind of a miraculous thing. The design business is much simpler and much more complicated at the same time. You know, we have a lot more freelancers we have to deal with and keep them on vision and on task. The projects tend to be much larger and long lasting. Like we're doing a bunch of work for Temple University right now. It's the 125th anniversary of their law school. So we're doing a book, we're doing a magazine, we're doing 2 videos, and a bunch of other stuff. And those projects will last 6 months, where a typical photo project, so kind of a, you know, you come in, you shoot the job, and you hand off the product. You know, it's not a long-term kind of thing. So the way you budget your money and budget your expenses is a lot more complicated because you got to keep track of something over a long term. And on top of that, I'm also involved in a tech startup right now, which is a completely different business, but it's really a lot of fun. I mean, I got to raise money and I have investors and, you know, it's a whole different ball game. But, you know, running a business if you have a good vision, if you have a good product where there's a demand for it in the marketplace, and you can stay disciplined and you can watch how much you spend, you know, you're careful on your spending side. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah. Do you have any advice to any photographers who are looking to start their own photography business?
Don't do it. Seriously, it's just not a good business. Go into video. It's not bad. Video's growing. Still photography shrinking. The creative business has always been a problem. If you go back and read the biographies of Michelangelo, for example, he will complain about how the Pope does not understand what he wants to do. He does not want to pay him for what it's worth, and is always late in paying him anyhow. It's the same story that any artist, creative person would tell you today. My client doesn't understand what we're trying to do. They're trying to get me to do it for a lot less than I think it's worth. And when I finally do and deliver the job, they take forever to pay me. Nothing's changed in 500 years.
I'm a freelance graphic designer, so I totally understand all of those things. Yeah.
You know, the graphic design business world seems a little better because the clients we deal with tend to be, you know, Fortune 500. We have a few startups and their procurement departments usually run pretty fluid, but even there you get some issues, especially when it comes to competitive bidding. People do not understand, and nor should they. You know, if you do something really well, if you're like an excellent tightrope walker, or you know, you're a brilliant basketball player, or a great singer, what you do, the way you do it, the public looks at it and it looks kind of easy. They don't realize just how hard it can be.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's very true. So I ask every photographer this question. Now that everyone has access to devices that have cameras and everyone's taking all these pictures and there's this saturation of photos, what do you think is the difference between a professional photographer and a hobby photographer?
The only difference between a professional and a hobbyist is that a professional earns money doing it. Mm-hmm. I've seen really mediocre work come out of a lot of professionals. I've seen some amazing work come out of hobbyists. So just because you do it professionally doesn't mean you're any good. It just means you charge money and have convinced people to pay you for it.
Yep.
So that's the difference. Some professionals have some talent and have some game. At the high end of the market, they usually do, because that's the only way they can differentiate themselves is with their talent. But I'm always amazed at the quality of work I see with a lot of amateurs. You know, some people just really have a knack for visual storytelling.
Yeah. So my last question is, what is the most rewarding part of being a photographer?
Learning other people's stories, without a doubt. That's the most fun. I mean, it's really great to create something that's beautiful. You hang it on the wall and 10 years later, you still enjoy the visual experience. But what makes the day-to-day life for me as a photographer so much fun is I get to stick my nose in all sorts of different institutions and businesses and see how they run and who the people are and what their story is. And even a shoot like this where I'm not really, hired by them, you get to learn so much and you get to hear people's stories. And to me, that's the most wonderful. I did a huge shoot down in New Orleans about a year post-Katrina. I was down there about 10 times photographing for Louisiana tourism. And those shoots were physically extremely hard. I was down there for Mardi Gras for a week once, and I was on my feet 14 hours a day for like 7 days. I mean, it was just exhausting. But I got to see Mardi Gras in a way I would never, ever see it. And it made it really worthwhile.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, we're coming up on 7 o'clock. Does anyone have any questions or comments for Zave before we end for the evening?
I just want to say thank you all for spending the time with me. I really appreciate it. Hope you enjoyed yourselves.
Thank you so much. This was awesome. I'm going to dust off my camera now and take some photos. Thanks for the inspiration.
My pleasure.
Have a good night, everyone.
Good night, all.